Some faces become legends. They are whispered about in hushed tones, their names synonyms with fear, isolation, and finality. For 29 years, one small island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay was more than just a prison. It was a symbol, a final, brutal statement in the American justice system. Alcatraz, the Rock, a final destination for America's most notorious criminals, from which there was supposedly no return. It was designed, engineered, and run with a single brutal promise: no one escapes. The government was so confident they claimed it was impossible. Surrounded by freezing, treacherous waters and patrolled by expert guards, any attempt was considered suicide. And for years, they were right. Every escape attempt, and let me tell you, there were many of them, ended in failure, capture, or death. Until one night, in June of 1962, 3 men did the impossible. They vanished from their cells and from the island, seemingly into thin air, leaving behind a mystery that has baffled the FBI for over 60 years. The official story is that they drowned in the icy waters of the bay, but a trail of tantalizing clues, a secret family photo, and a mysterious letter sent to the police just a few years ago might finally prove that the 3 men who escaped Alcatraz got away with it. To understand the genius of the escape, you first have to understand the fortress they escaped from. Before it was the world's most infamous federal prison, the island of Alcatraz served as a military fort. Its cannons pointed out towards the Golden Gate to protect the bay. By the 1930s, its isolation made it the perfect place for a new kind of prison, one designed to hold the worst of the worst. The gangsters, killers, and escape artists that no other facility could handle. When it opened as a federal prison in 1934, it was more than just a prison. It was an experiment in psychological warfare. In its early years, a strict and soul-crushing rule of silence was enforced, forbidding inmates from speaking for most of the day. The cells were cold, cramped, and constantly damp from the salty sea fog that enveloped the island. The cruelest torture was the location itself. On a clear day, the inmates could see the vibrant city of San Francisco less than a mile and a half away. They could hear the sounds of life, the laughter from the yacht parties, the chatter of the city, the celebratory horns on New Year's Eve, a constant agonizing reminder of the world they had lost. A world so close yet entirely unreachable. The system was designed not just to contain the body, but to break the spirit. It was meant to be the end of the line. But in the early 1960s, a handful of inmates arrived who saw the impossible not as a barrier, but as a challenge. They weren't just common criminals, they were a unique combination of brains, skill, and sheer determination. First, there was Frank Morris, the undisposed mastermind. Orphaned at age 11, Morris spent his youth bouncing between foster homes, a lonely upbringing that forged a sharp, self-reliant mind. He was arrested for his first crime at just 13. By the time he was an adult, his intelligence was undeniable, with an IQ reportedly in the top 2% of the whole population. In the prison system, he gained a reputation as a professional escaper, a quiet, calculating man who was always studying his surroundings and looking for an angle. He was sent to Alcatraz after escaping from Louisiana State Penitentiary. If anyone could find a weakness in the rock, it was him. Then came the brothers, John and Clarence Anglin. Raised in a large family of 13 children as seasonal farm workers in Florida, the Anglins began robbing banks as young men. often using a toy gun. They were known to be inseparable. While they weren't geniuses like Maurice, they were seasoned escapers. In fact, they landed in Alcatraz after a successful, temporary escape from the federal prison in the Atlanta. They were resourceful and had a lifetime of experience working with their hands. They would become the skilled labor of the operation. And finally, there was Alan West. Arrested over 20 times, West was in for car theft. He was sent to Alcatraz after a failed escape attempt at another prison. He was known for his mechanical aptitude and was a crucial part of the initial planning stages. He would ironically become the escape's most important witness because he was the man who failed to make it out.
The plan began with a simple, almost insignificant observation by Frank Morris. He noticed that the salty sea air that constantly flowed through the ventilation system had corroded the metal grills in the cells. The concrete around them was old, crumbling, and soft. He realized that with the right tools, he could slowly, patiently chip away at the wall and access the underground utility corridor that ran behind their entire cell block, a 3-foot wide highway to freedom that no one had ever thought to use. But where would they get the tools in a maximum security prison? They made them. They stole spoons from the mess hall and, using silver salvaged from a dime, soldered them into digging equipments. They took discarded saw blades from the prison's workshop. The centerpiece of their toolkit, however, was a drill, ingeniously crafted from the motor of a broken vacuum cleaner left in the utility corridor. For nearly a year, their lives were governed by a secret second schedule. The work began every evening around 5:30 p.m. when the prison's official music hour had begun. This was their cover. Frank Morris himself was an accomplished accordion player, and he would play loudly, a cheerful melody masking the frantic scraping and chipping of his co-conspirators. They worked until 9 p.m., carefully chipping away all the concrete, creating a hole just big enough to squeeze through. To hide their progress, they crafted false walls out of painted cardboard and soap. Of course, they couldn't just leave an empty bed behind while they worked. This is where their most famous and haunting creation comes in: the dummy heads. Using a homemade paste of soap, concrete dust, and toilet paper, they sculpted shockingly lifelike heads. They had earned painting privileges, which allowed them to acquire flesh-colored paints from the prison art shop to make the heads look realistic. The final grisly touch? Real human hair, which they patiently collected from the floor of the prison barbershop. Each night, before slipping through the walls, they would perform the nerve-wracking ritual of placing the dummy heads in their bunks, arranging the blankets just so praying the guards making their hourly rounds would be fooled by the silhouettes in the dim light. The utility corridor behind their cells became their secret workshop. Here, protected by a system of lookouts, they assembled their masterpiece of engineering, an inflatable raft. They patiently acquired more than 50 standard-issue prison raincoats, some stolen, some bartered for, some given by other inmates. They used stolen glue and, in a surprisingly sophisticated move, laid the seams of the raft against the hot steam pipes that ran through the corridor. They vulcanized the rubber, melting the pieces together to create a strong, airtight seal. They fashioned a 14-foot-long, 6-foot-wide raft, complete with inflatable life preservers made from the sleeves. They even made wooden paddles from scrap wood. It was an incredible feat of prison engineering.
The night of June 11th, 1962, a thick fog rolled in, and a storm was brewing over the bay. The conditions were dangerous, but the darkness and chaos would also provide cover. It was the time. Morris and Anglin brothers squeezed through the holes in their cells and entered the dark, narrow corridor. But there was a problem. Alan West, the fourth member, was stuck. In his haste to conceal his work, he had used cement to patch the crumbling concrete around his ventilator grill, and it had hardened like rock. He couldn't get it out. He chipped away frantically with a spoon, hearing the faint sound of his partners preparing to leave without him. It was a race against time that he was losing. Morris and the Anglins couldn't wait. By the time West finally broke through his wall, hours later, the others were long gone. They had climbed 3 stories up the network of pipes inside the utility corridor, a vertical maze of steel in pitch-black darkness. They forced open a ventilation shaft on the roof and stepped out into the foggy night air of Alcatraz. From the roof, they scrambled down a 50-foot smokestack on the side of the building. They navigated the prison guards in silence, climbed over 2 12-feet-high barbed wire fences, and made their way to the island's northeast shore, a blind spot for the guard towers. Sometime after 10 p.m., they inflated their makeshift raft using a small accordion-like instrument which they had modified. Then they pushed off in the dark, frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, aiming for Angel Island 2 miles away. They were never seen again. The next morning, the escape was discovered in the most cinematic way possible. During the 7:15 a.m. count, Clarence Anglin's dummy head, which wasn't propped up correctly, fell to the floor. The guard, startled, reached into the cell and realized he was touching a cold, hard plaster face. The alarm was sounded. The prison went to immediate lockdown. The warden, B.J. Johnstone, in a state of disbelief, contacted the FBI. One of the largest and most intense manhunts in history had begun. Hundreds of law enforcement officers descended on the Bay Area. Boats and helicopters sourced the water and coastlines, while agents on the land searched for any signs of the fugitives. The FBI found some debris in the water, a makeshift paddle, and later a small rubber pouch carefully wrapped to be waterproof, containing personal photos and addresses belonging to one of the Anglins. But they found no raft and, most importantly, no bodies. After a 17-year investigation, the FBI officially closed its case in 1979. Their conclusion was blunt: the men had drowned. They argued that the personal items found in the bay proved the raft had failed, and that the powerful currents would have swept their bodies out to the Pacific Ocean. Case closed. But many were not convinced. For a bay as heavily trafficked as San Francisco's, it's highly unusual for 3 bodies to never surface. Some investigators and fugitive families have long theorized that the valet and paddle were initially released as decoys, meant to throw the FBI off their trail and make them believe they had drowned. Then the counter-evidence began to trickle in. A Norwegian ship captain reported seeing what he believed was a body floating near the Golden Gate Bridge the day after the escape, but didn't report it at the time. More tantalizingly, the Anglin family reporting strange signs. Their mother supposedly received Christmas cards for several years after the escape, signed in her son's handwriting. Another relative claimed to have received flowers delivered anonymously for years. The most explosive piece of evidence came from a family friend decades later. He produced a photograph claiming it was given to him by the family and was taken in Brazil in 1975. It allegedly shows the 2 Anglin brothers alive and well 13 years after their escape. Forensic experts have analyzed the photo, and while inconclusive, they state the resemblance is strong. But the biggest bombshell dropped in 2013. A letter sent to the San Francisco Police Department began with the chilling words, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I am 83 years old and in a bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. The writer went on to say that Frank Morris died in 2008 and his brother Clarence died in 2011. He offered a deal. If you announce on TV that I will be promised to first go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I will write back to you and let you know exactly where I am. The FBI lab analyzed the letter for DNA and fingerprints, but the results were inconclusive. Is it a hoax, or is it the final confession of the last survivor of the greatest prison break in history? The escape sent shockwaves through the America's justice system. It had exposed a vulnerability in what was supposed to be an unbreakable institution. Less than a year after the escape, in March of 1963, Alcatraz was officially closed. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy cited the prison's deteriorating infrastructure and its incredibly high operating costs as the main reasons. But there is no doubt that the escape and the embarrassment it caused contributed to the decision. The Rock had been conquered. So what is the truth? Did 3 men succumb to the frigid waters of Bay, their ingenious plan failing at the final hurdle? Or did they pull off the perfect crime, living out their lives in freedom, forever taunting the legend of the inescapable Rock? The FBI may have closed their file, but the mystery of what happened on that foggy night in 1962 remains very much open. What do you believe happened to the man who escaped from Alcatraz? Let me know your theory in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more dives into history's greatest unsolved mysteries.